Hi, everyone. This is Jim Jackson. I could see Florence right now being very, very excited with her ancestors being from Sicilian descent. And I am very looking forward to this with one of our favorite people, comedian, actor, and do all everything and expert of Las Vegas, the great Keith Lyle. How are you, Keith?
I'm doing great, thanks. Another beautiful day in Las Vegas.
Oh, you got to love it. Plus, we're going to talk about things that from the past. And if you're a historian or you love the Mafia, you love Vegas, you love some fun talk, that's what this show's all about, because Keith and I could talk about this for hours. We're both very entrenched with this subject. Keith, being in Las Vegas right now, what were your first kind of thoughts, even as a kid, that you knew that there was a mob, that you knew there was a mafia? And also the second question, when were your first ties to Vegas, where you realized when you were living here or you moved here, and also your ties to when you knew that the mob was involved in Vegas in a big way?
I grew up in the Chicago area, in the north suburbs of Chicago, and a lot of, at the time in the 70s and 80s, the mobsters, the Las Vegas mobsters, had ties to Chicago. They came from Chicago. For instance, Anthony Spilotro moved, which is the guy Pesci played in Casino, moved to Vegas in 1971 to take over a loan sharking business. So that's why. Chicago and Las Vegas had ties to gambling and the mob. I mean, dating back to the first mobster was that came to Vegas or in Nevada was in the 1920s. There's a guy named Bill Graham and his associate Jim McKay, and they were associates of Al Capone. They ran Casino in Reno, but
Wow.
So it's been here forever. I first realized that I was probably 12 or 13, and one of the kids in my Hebrew school, his uncle had been shot and killed in a mob-style killing.
Oh,
and
man.
I was like, oh, well, I guess that happens. You know, I know that kid's uncle. I met him at his birthday party. So, we better be careful of that guy, that kid. So that's when I first learned about it. Now, I moved to Vegas in 93. So the mob was pretty much gone by then, but there were still remnants out here, people who had worked for them. For instance, my father-in-law, he worked for them in the early 70s and 80s as a casino manager. He was a straight guy. He was very honest. He worked for the owners prior to the mob company called Argent buying it. It was a strawman company. A guy named Alan Glick owned the company, and that's where they owned the Stardust, the Marina, the Hacienda, the Fremont downtown, amongst other things. And he just ran the Marina, and then he was also running the Hacienda. And they'd come in and they'd say, you need to find a job for this guy, and he'd find him a job somewhere, sitting at a desk or spinning the big 6-wheel or something stupid.
Sure.
Like Spilotro, his first job in Vegas was running the gift shop at Circus. But being the loud, angry guy that he was and running, loan sharking out of there, they quickly made him leave Circus, which was, that was run by a guy named Sarno, who also started Caesars in 1966. Now, the mob's influence is long and goes forever, but what they did was no bank would loan money to build a casino in the 60s and 50s, kind of like the way that dispensaries across the country, because it's federally illegal, marijuana pot shops can't use banking. So even though gambling was legal in Nevada, banks weren't really one to lend money to build places. But who was the Teamsters Pension Fund.
Yep.
Which has ties to organized crime and all their rackets. So that's how they would borrow money from them. And in the way mob business runs, you got to kick up. So if you make a buck, you got to kick up to the next guy. And so that's how it all worked, and everything worked out. All these places got built, money got paid back. If you paid back, during that era, no one really got whacked. Because all the money was paid. It was Bugsy Siegel, Benjamin Siegel, who got whacked because he borrowed money from everyone and couldn't pay it back in time.
Yeah,
So
he's a lavish spender too. Kind of and another brash guy. Now the first, and what's funny for our younger listeners, the Teamsters were extremely powerful at that time, and Hoffa always would threaten, I could, I could bring the country to its knees, I think was his famous statement. So they were very powerful, and they had a lot of money. So
yes, if you look back to the golden era of maybe your parents or grandparents living, say the 50s and 60s, where there was complete homogeny and everyone was middle class, making a good living, and all these things that we known in our history. More than probably 50 to 65% of those jobs were union jobs, paying a union wage. And starting in the early 70s through the Reagan era, they've done their best to break up unions, and now they're trying to break up police unions, obviously for a different reason. But so if, say, the union truckers were going to strike, well, the supermarket checkout people, they were gonna strike too. So they, or call in. Everyone's gonna call in sick at the same time. Yeah. So it started. Reagan actually broke the
air traffic
controllers union in 1980, I believe, or 81, and that set everything backwards.
For sure.
Yeah, but until then, I mean, it was union jobs. Conservatives across the country have done, and I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but they've done an excellent job at breaking unions, and even in town where they were trying to start unions for jobs that didn't have it before, like, say, casino dealers. They did an excellent job of making sure those unions didn't exist. They do now, but they didn't before, and they have very little power.
Yeah, and obviously the overseas jobs, that really
did something as well.
Killed a lot too. But let's get back to this. I wanted to ask you, now in my research, it said that the El Rancho was the first mob-run casino by Thomas Hull, and then that's when Bugsy came in and he did the Flamingo. Is that what your recollection is, or do you remember other ties with the Mafia?
The way I've heard the story is that Siegel came to town in the early 40s. Now, his childhood buddy was Meyer Lansky, who was kind of like the chief financial officer of the mob. And he came in with another guy named Mo Sedway. And they came in and they had race wire services. So all the horse racing would come over. They ran that. So if you wanted to take bets on horse races, you had to go through these two guys. So they came to town. And when they saw they kind of had an idea what they could do. So they got involved with the El Cortez in the early 40s. On a side note, I worked at the El Cortez in the early 90s, dealing 25-cent craps, but that's a story for a different podcast. That was way after they left. So they started at the El Cortez and set up skimming operations there, and at a couple other properties that they kind of wedged their way into. And once they saw how easy it was and what they can do, they kind of turned their sights onto what was at the time called the Highway, Highway 91, which is now what we call the Strip. And Siegel, the guy that owned Ciro's restaurant in LA, I think he also owned the Hollywood Reporter at the time. He was a publisher there. His name was Billy Wilkerson. He had started building the Flamingo, but the guy was a degenerate gambler and had a real big drinking problem, and the project was stalled early on. And so Siegel came in, bought him out, took it over, and that's, changed a lot of the plans as they were building it. Didn't like what he saw, so there was cost overruns. I think it went up to like $6 million, which in 1947 is way too much money. And and it wasn't able to pay it back in time, because prior to the Flamingo being, it wasn't as Hollywood glitzy, glamorous as the movie portrays, but everything else in Vegas at the time, almost everything else, they were called sawdust joints. They had sawdust on the floor. So when the cowboys or the guys that were working in the mines, around town, around the area, they would come in and chew their tobacco or whatever. They'd spit on the floor or spill a drink. It was easy to clean up.
Yeah, it was like old West days almost.
Wild West. I mean, it hadn't changed since 1905 or 6, there was a small area, I think it was called Block 16, where they were allowed to do prostitution and gambling, in that little area. It's right by the train station. It's downtown, actually, where the new Circa is being built. The old Las Vegas Club, if you could, if for our old timers. And so it hadn't changed much since casinos of that era until Siegel came in and put carpeting on the floors and put really good entertainment in, because from the gambling places back east, the backdoor gambling places back east, that's what they had. They had lounge shows there. They had, they would tell people to calm down a little bit because they had too much to drink or they lost too much money and just watch the show. That's what they were doing there. So,
now, it seems like what I've read about Meyer Lansky, and the guy was a semi-genius, real smart financial guy. I don't think he ever was in jail at any time. And then obviously Lucky Luciano was very smart in making the commission. So instead of killing each other and whacking each other when something goes wrong, hey, let's run this like a business, a corporation. And of course, Bugsy Siegel was an eccentric, wild guy, loved to party, loved to do his thing, and spent way too much money. So even when he's your friend, I read that Meyer Lansky saved him a couple times, but after a while, he had to get rid of him. So
there's only so much
let him go.
And part of the problem with Ben Siegel was he wanted to be an actor, good-looking guy. He liked the spotlight. He liked good-looking women. Mobsters in general don't like heat. They like to lay low. Meyer Lansky, you'll never hear his voice on film ever. It's hard to find. He's just a quiet guy. Luciano, the same thing. They didn't speak in public. They kept it quiet. They didn't want any heat. They just went about their business. And guys who brought heat got whacked because they didn't want it. And with Siegel, he brought a little heat, but he owed too much money. And if you can't pay the juice, you got to go. And then they got to bring someone in to get them their money back. And they did. And then some. I think the original Flamingo building they tore down in the late 90s, and it's timeshares now behind the current Flamingo.
Wow. Now, and I also remember, I can't remember his girlfriend.
Virginia
Hill.
Yeah.
Remember, she spoke at the Senate committee meetings, and she just acted, I don't know what you're talking. I never heard of no mob. I don't know what you're talking about.
Organized crime. How could you organize crime? Crime is disorganized. That makes no sense, sir.
She goes, he's just a guy went out with. So just amazing. But
just another rich guy. One of many.
But then after that, it seemed like they, at least what I was talking to some other people as well, Meyer Lansky and everybody, they realized, you know what, we're going to run this like a business. Enough of this nonsense. They got the Flamingo done. And then also I read where they kind of laundered a lot of money through the banks, and they would actually put money in the bank and launder it that way as well. And Meyer Lansky just had a lot of schemes to get money into the casinos and to build. And after that, it just seemed like everything kind of built up. When your recollection, talking to older people that have been in Vegas, were they ever worried about the mob? Were they ever upset about the mob? Or they just thought, wow, they're bringing in some great money. They're building us up. This is fun.
No one ever, the way I understand it, and it's the same when I was growing up in Chicago and you knew they were around. If you didn't do that kind of business with them, you were fine. Like my father-in-law worked for him. He was a casino manager for many years. He didn't run the skim. He didn't. He knew the guy that was coming in. He knew what the guy was doing. As long as his books looked right and he could turn it in, he would have no problem with his gaming license, which he never did. It was none of his business. His business was running the casino and making sure the games were honest. That was his job. Everything that happened after that, he had nothing to do with. So even the lowest level people, if you were a blackjack dealer, and I was, not for the mob, blackjack and craps for many, many years, for 23, 24 years. If you're doing your job, you don't care how they make their money. You don't care what they're doing upstairs, as long as, because it's a tipping job, as long as there are tips in the tip jar, no one cares. If the cocktail waitress is making money, if the bellman's making money, the cab drivers are making money, no one cares what you do. And if you're not involved in their business, if you're not borrowing money from Tony Spilotro, it's really not your problem what he does. It's just not. And as long as he's not whacking someone, shooting crazy and accidentally hitting someone innocent, no one cares.
Yeah. That's what my father was saying, that a lot of people at his age said in their 70s and 80s, they said Las Vegas was so much fun in the 60s and 70s because he said there were times where he had a couple friends one time go down there. They blew all their money and got drunk. There were times where the hotel would put them up.
Yeah.
And then they would go, and because they wanted you to gamble. So the rooms were cheap, the food was cheap. They thought, we don't care if you're middle class, lower middle class, whatever, your money is green. So we want you in the casino. And when you gamble, that's what we want, because the odds are for us. And that was their mentality, where now, and you could tell us a little bit about the corporate takeover, as I'm pretty anti-corporation for most things because they screw up everything with their greed. But boy, I'm telling you, to see the MGM and to see all these people, all these corporations now, they seem like they're just penny pinching people. And going to Vegas now is just really expensive. And it's something I don't do too much anymore.
Well, Vegas was one of these things, like in the casino, what everything makes, right? So on a table game, like a craps game will hold 17% on average, generally, between, on the low end, 12%, on the high end, 22%. Now they make them so they have games in there that hold 25%, like your Mississippi Studs and Caribbean Stud, and 6-5 blackjack, and you can only double down on certain things, and all these other side bets on the dice game that absolutely are slow. People love them because you could hit 175 to 1.
I hate them.
But they slow the game down to a pace that because the casino has. Here's what they give you. They give you hands of cards. The more hands that go out in 21, the more money they make, because they know they're going to make between, if you're playing perfect strategy on blackjack, they still have like a 0.5 to 1% advantage.
Yeah.
Right. And if who plays perfect strategy? It's near impossible to do on a 6-deck shoe, even a double deck. It's very hard to do because of the way they cut the deck. So they know you have an advantage. You don't have to do all those other things. The casino, they just wanted you to gamble because that's where they made their money. They'll put you, now when the corporations come in, they build these places with 6,000 suites, like the Venetian where I work. They go, well, wait a minute. These are suites. We could get at least $175 a night. We don't want to give those away. Yeah. So our comp policy is going to change. And that's kind of when it started. Now, working at the Venetian when I did, before it went public, when old man Adelson was there, he would ride around his little car. He'd ask us how the food in the employee dining room is. He was very, very nice, very personal.
Wow, really?
He was excellent to work for. He always, and to this day, it's funny because he's such a big Republican donor, and he believes that everyone should have health insurance with no monthly premium. We never paid. We had a copay. It started with $0 and went up to like $15 when I left 3 years ago. Like he wanted to make sure. I mean, that he grew up poor. He knows how it is.
That shocks me because I was so anti-Adelson. He was the first I read that gave money to Trump during his election.
Absolutely.
Because Trump said, I don't want any money. And of course, the first thing he did was take money.
All the years I worked there, we had all kinds of debates. I dealt blackjack to Sarah Palin a few years ago.
Wow.
Beautiful woman. Had to help her count, but she's a beautiful woman. She was very, very nice. Very, very, very nice.
She did not see Alaska where she was sitting, did she?
I know. I dealt to John McCain and Lindsey Graham. And
wow.
Yeah. They, for someone who believes in trickle-down economics, they weren't necessarily generous. But at the time they weren't winning either, so I don't expect to get tipped if you don't win.
Okay, let's dish some dirt. Who's the worst tipper? And maybe it'll be easier if they're passed away by now. Who's the worst tippers?
Let's see. Michael Jordan, who I adore, is a terrible tipper.
Wow.
Yeah. And now, my personal belief, I've heard dealers say that he says to them, just dealing to him should be enough. And I don't know if that's necessarily true.
What?
I don't know if that's true. I've heard that secondhand. But I believe that people who are degenerate gamblers or in a really bad gambling pattern, any money that they tip is money they can't gamble. So
Oh.
and because I'm from Chicago, I'll give him a break. But you know, J Lo's notoriously cheap. I didn't. Now, guys who like Charles Barkley's great. Dana White from the UFC is great. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Phil Ivey. He's kind of he's a real jerk to deal to.
I've heard horror stories about Phil Ivey, how mean he is to people.
Yes, he's a real jerk to deal to. But if a fan walks up, he's the nicest guy in the world.
One of those.
I saw him. I was walking by. He was playing baccarat one day at the Venetian. I was walking by the baccarat room, and I saw him throw a bottle of water against the wall. I guess that was when they shut down that poker website that he was a part of.
Oh, yeah, he lost a lot of money off that.
So, but if he wins, like he walks up to the table and asks for $500 rim, which is like his marker, his line of credit, but don't run the marker yet because he's just going to play for a little while, see if he wins or loses. And he puts, he'll have $200,000-$300,000 on the craps layout without thinking about it. And I've seen him lose $600,000-$700,000 and walk away really crappy. Mad. I've seen him win $1-2 million. Wow. If he wins, he leaves you like $2,000.
Wow.
That's it. If he loses, probably nothing. If he breaks even, you may get $100. But he runs you like crazy.
What about the poker brat?
Which guy's that?
What's his? Oh God, I can see his face. He's really nasty to other players. He thinks he's a perfect player.
Oh yeah, he's a jerk. I know the guy. Helmuth, maybe.
Phil Hellmuth.
Not only is he bad, but his sister's a real bad person.
Really?
She was in a blackjack tournament, and one of the players, I was watching a lady who I happen to know. She used to come in the casino regularly, and she came over to my game, and she had a real sour look on her face. I said, "Oh, you lose the tournament?" She goes, "No, I won the tournament, but I forget the lady's name, but it's Helmuth's sister. She was so nasty that it just ruined the whole thing." And she's like, "I don't even want to continue in the tournament." That's how bad it was.
Oh,
Cake Boss.
God.
I saw the guy that's Cake Boss. I saw him be real bad, real crappy to a cocktail waitress. Like he said to her, he was at my table and the waitress comes by and he'd had a couple in him and he had just filmed the finale of one of his shows at the Venetian. And he said to her, "You shouldn't be wearing that outfit." And I was like, dude, come on. Like, first of all, you're heavier than her. Second of all, how do you say that to a woman? I don't care how many drinks you had or how bad you're losing. Like, that's just mean. Like, that's just wrong.
When I was a waiter at the country club, that was the best tipper I ever had. The worst were freaking baseball players. I'll have to tell you about two Hall of Famers on the side. One who stipped me on a $200 bill, but the NBA players were really giving. Barkley gave me, he didn't pay for him, but he gave me $50 in shoes one time. So he was really a cool guy. But let's get back to the Mafia because we could. Yeah, I could
go on cheap guy.
We'll get back to so we'll have every week. We'll do some good and bad tippers because there's a few I know you've dealt with that I am dying to ask about.
Drug runners were great, all kinds of stuff. So getting back to, I could go on for hours. I'm crazy. But Adelson was great to work for, and he was very nice. I mean, he was wonderful. And as he got the concessions in China and the company went public and the bureaucracy grew and he became more and more insulated, now people were doing things and making decisions they thought he would want them to make. And he may have dealt with the people directly below him, his top managers directly below him in a certain style. And that style trickled down to the rest of us. So it became like a kind of volatile at that point, but now Mr. Adelson would never talk to us that way. He may have talked to those people that way when he was paying those people in the millions of dollars with shares and plus shares of stock. You could get talked to that way.
Sure.
When you're a minimum wage employee working for tips, your bosses, shouldn't speak to you like that. And by bosses, I mean casino managers, people like that, not our immediate supervisors, but people even casino managers, vice presidents of gaming, things of this nature.
Now, what was Adelson? Did he ever have any ties with the mob that were very deep?
It wasn't. It's believed he didn't. He was a convention guy. He started conventions, and the convention that he started that was big that he sold was called Comdex, which was a similar. It was like a computer type convention. He sold it for like $800 million to the Japanese. They didn't know what to do with it, so it's gone now. But he took that money and bought the Sands. Now, Steve Wynn, on the other hand, his dad used to run bingo games in Massachusetts and all kinds of things. And it's believed that his dad may have had ties to organized crime. And it's also possible that Wynn had ties to organized crime.
Wow.
At a small level. Wynn made his first million. He bought a piece of property near Caesar's Palace for maybe $1 million. I'm not sure how he got the money for that. But Caesars then bought it for substantial bit more, and he took that money and bought Golden Nugget downtown. Wow. And made the Golden Nugget a wonderful, wonderful place. Much of it is the same, as nice as it is now under the current owner, Tillman Fertitta. It's as beautiful as it ever was, and it's set that the jewel of downtown was the Golden Nugget, set by Steve Wynn back in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And it still holds up today because of what he put into it. Sinatra played there. It was unbelievable. Then,
Oh, the Rat Pack and all those guys.
Then Wynn built the Mirage in 88, Treasure Island.
Yeah.
Yada,
now,
yada.
Last thing I want to talk about for this episode, what is your all-time old school favorite casino and why?
Oh, boy. That's tough because when I didn't get, like, prior to 93, I'd never come to Vegas. I came to Vegas because I was going to go to college here. My cousin was going to college here. I went to college.
Kind of one that you've heard about, because obviously
much of a gambler, but
I
would say now for me personally, because my father-in-law spent so much time running the hacienda, and I have had so many stories. My wife has great stories about being a child running through the hacienda. I would say the hacienda would probably be my favorite. I think the Sands is a great. Everyone here loves the old Sands stories because of the Rat Pack. The Sahara, which is still here, believe it or not, used to have Johnny Carson and like Don Rickles would play the lounge. That's what lounge acts were. You could go to a lounge for 2 drinks and see Ike and Tina Turner.
Yeah. In
like 1970 or 69, Ike and Tina Turner for the price of 2 drinks, and during their breaks, Don Rickles would come out and insult you.
Oh, my God.
That's just insane. The old Frontier is a great old property from back in the day. My father-in-law worked there at the front desk and met Jack Benny, which was one of my favorites. Like,
oh yeah,
that's where Elvis played his first show in Vegas in '56, I think, and did poorly. Did not get a good response.
Really?
Yeah.
Was it because he did a bad performance, or was it just they didn't get it?
They didn't get it. I think it was a little of both. I think no one was ready for that. I mean, and I think that he was a little nervous. He was a young man. A place like where Planet Hollywood is, it used to be the Aladdin. Wayne Newton once owned the Aladdin. Actually, he bought it from the mob.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The mob had to sell it, and he bought it.
Oh, man.
He didn't know what to do, but he owned it at one time.
Now, when did Wayne Newton become such a big deal? Because I still don't know too much about Wayne Newton. But when did he become a big deal?
In the early 60s, he had a song called Donkashane. He was about a 12 or 13-year-old boy, and his voice was completely different. And he just, over the years, became just a Vegas guy, was always here, was always working, and, became Mr. Las Vegas. He would do things overseas. He'd do Liberace show because Liberace played Vegas. And he just was able to continually work that. But that's, what he's known for. I've met him. He's very scary looking now.
Really? Oh,
pretty
plastic
nice
surgery
guy.
and stuff.
Yeah. Pretty nice fella though, but it's hard for him because he's barely hanging on to what a little bit of a career. He still performs at Cleopatra's Barge at Caesar's Palace. His voice is shot. He can't. He's in his 70s. So and when you're in your 70s, that's why like guys like Paul McCartney and Aerosmith, like these guys can still sing. And Wayne Newton, he's gone.
I just listened to Paul McCartney last night, and he was doing solos a cappella.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm
amazing.
thinking, gosh, that guy could still sing. It's amazing. So yeah, Wayne Newton was one, but he's loaded, so he doesn't have to do it. He wants to do it.
Right. Also, I would say if I had to, now that I've given it some thought, my favorite old casino, one that isn't there anymore, would be the Riviera.
Oh, yeah.
I say that because that's where we filmed The Hangover, my scene where I play the blackjack dealer.
Yep, I was just going to say
I would go with the Riviera.
Oh, we're going to have to get a picture of that. We're going to share that for you. The film studio won't sue me, will they?
No,
maybe
no. I have it on my
YouTube
business
will.
card.
Yeah, maybe YouTube will, but not. Now, Florence, don't be worried. Do a GoFundMe page if after a month or so of this podcast that we're missing. Keith and I are nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
But we're gonna dish. We're gonna talk the real stuff, and hopefully the people that are older and still alive, they don't care anymore, and the ones that are gone, God rest their soul. But this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about gambling, and we're going to talk about all the casinos. Next week, we're going to talk about a senator that really stirred it up in the 50s and got things going. And he ran for president twice. And just an amazing story of that this senator that until about 6 months ago, I had never heard of. So this is
a lot of that history. Some of that history still remains here in town.
Wow, that's going to be a fun episode. I can't wait. But thank you so much, Keith. This is
my pleasure.
Florence says this is going to be. She goes, you and Keith are going to have the biggest podcast. He goes, you're going to get everybody. But
knock on wood.
Excuse me, I'm really excited about this. So thanks again, Keith. We'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next week. We'll have this out tomorrow on YouTube, and we'll do it on Spreaker. Please follow Keith. He's a great follow, and his experience as a comedian, that's another thing that I want to get into is I think I want to get a show for comedians that we're going to do a one episode. Maybe if it's that popular, we'll do another one with Keith. And also now that we have Daisy that's written for several shows, and Marianne who's also done stand-up comedy. So I think that would be a fun roundtable to talk about your experiences, to talk about because I have to be honest with you, Keith, I think comedy is the hardest thing to make in Hollywood. It just, to me, is so hard to really make it without being a drug addict or without having all the things. So I respect all comedians. Yeah. So
thank you, and thanks for listening.
Oh yeah. Thanks everybody. We'll take care, and we'll talk to you next week.